Hi, I'm Rob Cosnan. Welcome to my shop. I'm frequently asked about cutting the groove to house either the bottom or a sliding lid in a dovetail joint. There's 4 methods that I commonly use. Going to show them all to you. Stay with us. I'm Rob Cosman and welcome to my shop. We make it our job to help take your woodworking to the next level. If you're new and you haven't subscribed, please do so. Hit the notification bell so you'll receive alerts when we release a new video. And anytime we use a special tool, we'll always leave a description down below. All right, let's get to work. If you're building boxes, drawers, you got to have a bottom. It's whether it's a solid wood bottom or a plywood bottom, it's always best to have that bottom held in place in a groove on 4 sides. It just makes for much better construction. However, the problem is always going to be encountered. How are you going to cut that groove? Whether hand tools or power tools, you don't want it to show on the ends. There's a half blind. Here's a drawer where I actually had the dovetails come all the way through as part of the design feature. But again, you've got a drawer bottom that's got to be housed, in this case, on 3 sides. You don't want to see that groove going through. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through. I'm going to go easiest to the more complicated, but all of them are acceptable. One, not quite so. At least not for real fine furniture, but certainly for shop furniture. So I'm going to go through them one at a time. Like I said, I'm going to start with the easy one. Here's the first example. So what we've got is a dovetailed corner, and the groove has been cut all the way through. Now you can almost always put it in between either 2 tails or 2 pins, in this case between 2 pins. So I've only got one spot to correct, and that's going to be in the end of the tail. Now I'm going to go ahead and assemble this, and then we'll show you how to hide that, or at least disguise that groove that comes all the way through. So on this side you got a nice clean dovetail, but on this side there's that missing tooth. So what we're going to do is going to fill that, and you could take the time to actually match the grain. I'm going to do it just a little bit of that. Put this in the vise to make it a little easier to work. Now, there's a piece, and the grain is running like that. I don't know how realistic it's going to be to actually get that to look like it came out of there, but we'll try. So my rings are running like this, so match that right there. I'm just drawing a line to match up with the top of the groove that we're trying to fill. I'll put a little bit of a slope on that so we can kind of fit it in like a wedge. Gotta make the cut first. Now you're working small pieces like that. This is where I much prefer to use hand tools as opposed to trying to cut that out with any kind of a power tool. This is just one of the pieces of waste off of the dovetail. So the first thing I'm going to do is cut the bottom square. We'll clean it up with the shooting board, but now we can go in here and follow those lines. Okay, now I've got a new shooting board. We have a little small one. Using it with my block plane just makes it a little easier to get in tight with small pieces like this. Just gonna square up those edges. Now see how far off we are. I'm going to put a little bit of I'm just pushing the top of this edge in a little harder so that we can introduce a little bit of taper. It's a good idea to put your lines on there because it gets very difficult to see, but I can still tell because of the pencil mark which way the grain lines are running. Now this is to fat, so we'll trim it down. See if I can't. Okay, there we go. That did it. Now we need a little bit of glue. I'm going to put glue on all 4 sides. There's no great amount of force acting on this, so we just need it to be held in place so that it doesn't come out. Now I'm going to use a flush trim. We could wait for that to dry, but like I said, there's no force acting on it, so we should be able to take it out right now. Now we'll put this back in and finish planing it. The saw marks. Now, I know it's in there, but I can't see it. That's actually a good problem. It's right in here somewhere. That's a pretty good hide. If I had magnifiers on, I'd be able to see it, but that would go, I'm pretty sure that would go unnoticed. Okay, method number 2, if you have access to a router table, this is an easy one. Now I've got 2 pieces, the tailboard and the pin board. I'm going to mark the bottom just with a B. And what we're going to do is we're going to stop it on the 1 piece. So I'm going to set my fence. Now this is a real simple router table. Bits coming up through. This is only 1/8 of an inch, but you can put any size you want. If you're using stuff that's under 1/4 of an inch and you don't have a 3/16 bit, just as easy to use an 1/8 inch and just adjust it accordingly. I'd like to have the first one run in between the 2 pins, so I'm only having to stop it in 1 piece. So I would set my fence to wherever I want it. I'll just see if I can spin that bit so I have the widest part over there. Lock that in place. Now this one will just simply run through like this because it's going to come in between here, won't damage anything. This one, what we need to do, and I've got a mark on here which represents where my router bit is, and I'll just put a mark on here. You don't really need it, but I'm going to start there. So hold it securely, drop it down. You can make that groove whatever width you want, but by stopping the groove with that straight bit, you don't have to worry about it coming all the way through. And then when you put your 2 pieces together, your groove lines up and everything's great. But that does require a router bit. You can't do that with you can do it with a table saw, but the arc of the table saw is going to leave you with a bit of area, quite a bit of area in here where you're going to have to come in and either use a small router plane or a small chisel to go in there and finish that down to depth. Okay, solution number 3 is a half blind, and here's an example. Here's a candle box, has the groove cut all the way around. Of course you don't see it because your half blind hides it. I'm going to demonstrate that and show you. The only downside to this is obviously it doesn't allow you to use a through dovetail. So here's your 2 pieces, your tailboard and your pin board. Now I put an X to mark the bottom, and I'm going to use a drawer bottom plane to cut this groove, and you just need to make sure that the drawer bottom plane is set so that the cutter is going to go in between the 2 pins. So we'll just set this in here and crank this out real quick. Doesn't take long. Nice thing about cutting the groove with this tool is that when it bottoms out, you know that the depth of the groove is precise over the entire length. Unlike a router or a table saw, where it may not be the same depth. This stops cutting. And when it stops, it's because these parts of the board have now bottomed out right here on this section and on that section, so it can't cut it any deeper than that. So there's one half. Now on this one, because it's a half blind, even though you're going to come right through the tail, it's going to be on the inside, so you don't see it. Let me put that down a little more. So your missing tooth is no longer going to be an issue, because when you put these two pieces together, those two grooves line up. Actually, that isn't seated all the way. Cut that too deep, but there's your groove. Lines up perfectly. Bottom sits in there and nobody will ever know the difference. Okay, our fourth method is not necessarily difficult. It just throws in another step to a through dovetail. So you kind of have to pay attention to a few of the details. And the one is that when you set your marking gauge line, it has to accurately represent the two pieces. You'll see why. So what I'm going to do is take my tail board, my pin board, set it on here, drop the gauge down, and lock it. Now that represents the thickness of my pin board. And I'm going to take that and I will scribe it all the way around my tail board. Now I'm just going to go ahead and lay this out as a normal tail board. The only thing you need to remember that we did differently is that that gauge line exactly represents the thickness of the pin board. Now on this one, for a little wall that we normally do with the skew block plane, instead I'm going to use several pieces of masking tape. It'll function as my wall when I cut it with the gauge, but it'll also come off and it's not going to throw me off, and I'll show you what I mean by throw me off in a moment. This, by the way, is automotive tape, painter's tape, and it's great because it's a little thicker and a little tackier. My marking gauge has got the same setting, and I'll just come in here and make several light passes. And peel that off. Okay, I'm not going to put my gauge lines on here yet. I'm going to go ahead and lay this pin portion out. Now, what we're going to do is we are going to use part of the pin to cover where our groove is. I'm going to go ahead and cut the groove. First thing I'm going to do is label the bottom, so make sure we're working on the proper edge. I'm going to go ahead and cut the groove in the tailboard. I won't cut it as deep, I'll just get it started. Okay, there's how deep it is. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the marking gauge and we're going to set it right there for the base of that groove. I want to make sure that's right on. Lock it. And then we'll put a gauge line right across that tail. Don't need to worry about this piece because that's coming off anyway. Then we're going to take that same setting, make sure these are lined up properly. This is the bottom edge, that's the bottom edge. And we're going to make this the bottom right here. Now, I should have done this first, but I'll go back and I'll reset this to the setting I had. And from this side of the pin, if I were to go ahead and pencil that in just so you can follow along a little easier. So this cut is going to come down to that line. Same thing over here. And then this cut, and I'm only just going to put it partially in, is going to go the full depth. So from there over, we'll finish this like we normally would. Come in with our gauge. I forgot to put that gauge line on the back, so let me go in and correct that. Now I can remove that waste. Now we'll chop that waste out. Now we'll cut our matching groove with this piece. We'll just make sure our corners are nice and clean.
Keep your frame up higher.
Pardon?
Keep your frame up higher.
Oh.
Okay.
Now, we need to remove this section, and I'm going to come in here and I'm going to cut this or chop this down right at that baseline. And I can use that as a guide for my depth. And then I should be able to chop that off quite easily. the chisel right in the gauge line. I'm holding this in such a way that I can see plumb. If you wanted to, you could come in, set your marking gauge. To that depth, lock it, and then just use that as a router plane to verify that you're down to the proper depths. Now we've got a groove, and we put the two pieces together. We'll just cut our chamfers real quick. Helps it go together easier. Remember when you do this not to go all the way out to the end. Should we throw some glue on this? Put it together. Turn it the other way. I'm going to turn it this way so you can see it close. We've got to account for the rabbet that we cut. I may not have cut that one quite deep enough. Check that for square. And that's called an offset dovetail. Now I suspect that little bit of a gap is a result of I should have taken a little bit more. In fact, I know it is because it's tight here and a little bit of a gap right there. So I missed that by just that amount. But it's another way of cutting or hiding a groove to house a bottom. That's 4. Hi, if you like my work, if you like my style of teaching, click on any one of these videos to help take your woodworking to the next level. And I've always said better tools make it a whole lot easier. If you click on the icon with the plane and the chisel, it'll take you to our website, introduce you to all of our tools, and also talk to you about our online and in-person workshops. Good luck in your woodwork.